Hello, I'm Richard Marshall, President of Siskiyou County Water Users Association. Our mission is to explain the truth surrounding the potential removal of the dams. We're trying to carry logic forward to keep the dams in place. And today we're going to be the second part of a series which I introduced previously as a 7-part series concerning the truth surrounding keeping the dams in place. And today I'm here with Susan Miller, who is a member of our board, Siskiyou County Water Users Board. Susan is a former environmental engineer with Hewlett-Packard, and she is with us and brings a great deal of experience and energy to our group in this area. So I would like to introduce Susan Miller today, and we're going to talk about the subject today is on red band salmon and the importance of knowing about red band salmon, a fact which the opposition, those who wish to remove the dams, has not been told. We're going to tell that today. We're going to cover that story today. So Susan, why don't you start off by telling us why it's important to talk about the red band salmon?
The red band salmon are a unique species of salmonoid trout, and they became landlocked at the end of the last ice age. In fact, they're so important that the wildlife biologists are considering making them their own subspecies. In the upper reaches of the Klamath River, they have a distinct advantage over the coho and the steelhead and any other fish because of their unique evolutionary advantages. It's likely that the pictures that have been circulating around the internet showing large salmon being caught up in the Klamath River in the upper reaches and in the Klamath Lake are red band because they get as large as 30 inches long and up to 40 pounds. And we're showing some pictures of people who have caught them over the years. So that's your adult red band, and they live to be 8 or 9 years old, and they grow very quickly in the Klamath Lake because there's so much food in the Klamath Lake. So that's where we are.
So what is the history behind the red band salmon trout?
They evolved during the Ice Age when most of the western states were covered with large, massive glacial lakes. And during the end of the Ice Age, that's when they became landlocked. The Klamath Lake is one of the largest of the glacial lakes that's left in the western United States. So it's important for the red band. And in the last 10,000 years, according to wildlife biologists from Oregon State University, we've gone through many wet and dry cycles, so the red band has had to evolve so it can survive through all these different periods. So that's what makes it so unique.
Right, so the red band, being such a unique fish, is sometimes often mistaken for salmon, isn't it? But I remember some of the old stories about the red call it salmon. They didn't call it red band. In fact, a lot of people didn't know the red band, even they didn't recognize it as being a trout. They didn't realize it was actually a salmon, part of the salmon family. What makes the red band so unique, in your opinion? What makes the red band so unique?
Well, the wildlife biologists have concluded that it's irreplaceable because of its unique abilities to survive in many different environments. And in Klamath Lake in particular, no other trout, rainbow, brook, brown, or cutthroat will even live in Klamath Lake. So they have.
Is that related to the temperature of the lake? Is there something about the temperature of the lake that affects that?
Red band can tolerate up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty high temperature for trout. Most trout like it in less than 60 degrees.
And salmon can't survive in that temperature, can they?
I don't think so. I don't
Yeah, they like much cooler
They like
temperatures.
it's the most trout and salmon like 60-degree or less
Right.
temperature because
Right.
of the dissolved oxygen gets less and less as the temperature increases. So also the red band are predatory. They live on other fish and invertebrates. So they're the only species of salmon that has teeth in their upper jaw. So that's an important. And they're also resistant to a variety of diseases and parasites, the most common being the sea shasta. They're very adaptable. They move from the Klamath River and tributaries in the winter, and then they move into Klamath Lake where there's a lot of food in the summer, in the spring, and in the summer it gets too hot in Klamath Lake, so they go back into the river. In the fall, they go back into the lake so they can eat everything they can before winter, and then they hang out in the bigger rivers where the temperature's more median throughout the winter. So that's what they do.
Are they cannibalistic? It seems to me I've heard that they eat other fish.
Yeah,
as part of
they'll
the
eat.
diet?
Yes, they do, and they'll even eat their own fry. They're not.
So
They're not picky.
this would be a problem in particular for the salmon if these red band were released into this area or they bring the salmon up to rear their young. That's not going to work very well, is it?
No. The red band have a definite advantage over the coho and the other salmon.
And so you identified the fact that this red band is as large as a salmon, and is one reason why a lot of people considered them salmon when actually although they're part of the salmon family, they're more of trout. What about if the dams are removed? What's likely to take place downstream once these red band are released? If the dams are removed, they're released into the environment downstream.
Well, they've been known to crossbreed with the steelhead, so that would dilute both those species, and the wildlife biologists are concerned because they're trying to conserve all the different species of salmon. The second thing is the removal of the dams would allow the warmer water from Klamath Lake to go all the way down the river, whereas now it's behind Iron Gate, they let the water out in the deep levels of the rivers, keeping the water.
The cooler water.
The cooler water is let out to go downstream into the lower reaches. So that would then make the red band a lot more evolutionary. It would give it an evolutionary advantage
Right.
over the other fish. And also presently the sea shasta parasite is mostly held behind the Iron Gate Dam and Copco dams. And so if you start letting all that water out, then that parasite is going to go through the whole river, and the red band is somewhat resistant to it, whereas the other varieties, it's pretty toxic. In fact, that's one of their big issues of why they flush the river in the spring and fall, is to get rid of that parasite.
So that's why you identified earlier the red band trout as being a superior vintage, if you will, of a salmon, more adapted or adaptive to the changing environments that were going to take place if the dams are out.
Right, and it's more adaptive to the Klamath Basin in general. And as you mentioned, the red band trout is carnivorous, so it feeds on other fish and invertebrates. So when it gets let out into the lower reaches, it's because of its size, it gobbles up massive amounts of fry and fingerlings
Now,
that the coho and the steelhead are going to lay in the lower Klamath. So
now the water users, as I recall, they did a study indicating that there was a natural process that was keeping red band from getting further down the river. Do you want to mention something about that?
yeah, that's correct. There was a series of 7 dikes or impediments, the lowest one being in Ward Canyon, which is basically just north of where the Iron Gate Dam is, that kept the red band from the anadromous fish that came up the river, kept them separated, except during big flood conditions, which didn't happen very often.
Right.
So
So again, if
basically, the red band is landlocked, And the anadromous fish are in the lower reaches. And the Klamath, the Iron Gate Dam is 192 miles from the mouth
Right.
of the river, so none of them traveled much further than that
And
anyways.
so you would say that releasing, by taking the dams out, the red band down into the currently biologically good conditions for salmon, this is going to be a problem for the salmon because this is a superior fish to the
Yeah, it has
salmon.
an evolutionary advantage, and
Right.
it could actually wipe out the other fish because
Right.
because of its advantages. And the other thing is the coho isn't native anyways. The
Yeah.
wildlife fisheries, they planted it first in 1897 and 2 times thereafter. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not uniquely suited to the Klamath Basin like the red band is. So in conclusion, I really think that the red band, being as it's more suited to the basin, could wipe out the other fish.
Right.
It could interbreed with the steelhead, and we could end up with just one breed of salmonoid trout.
Right, and one of the things you mentioned just briefly, I'd like to touch on again for our audience, and that is the a lot of the reports that were generated in the late 1890s and the 1900s, which were geared to track fishermen to the upper lake area, they kept referring to the salmon being up there, that salmon were available up there, etc. But in fact, as you've described, the red band trout salmon looks just like salmon. It grows to 40 pounds, pretty good sized fish, and was easy for people to mistake, I think, at that time. And it's one of the reasons that we are concerned about this fact that's been covered up, in effect, by the studies done by Franklin and by some others that were connected with, and Hamilton in particular, that did studies indicating that the salmon were up there in the first place when they mistook them for red band salmon. This is a big issue, the big issue that you've exposed to us and to the audience here today, I think.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that that is the case. And the bones that the fish bones they found, from what we understand, were traded rather than caught
Right.
by the Native Americans. So,
Right, so we would postulate to those who are listening to us today that this is a very important aspect to the whole question about whether salmon will survive, or even that they should survive going up into the upper lake area, because the red band salmon, being carnivorous, represent a serious biological problem which has been covered up to now by the authorities that are trying to remove the dams. So we invite you to take a look at these issues, study up on it yourselves, and satisfy yourself on this issue. We think you'll find that this is a serious problem going forward. And thank you for watching in and seeing us, and we'll look forward to covering some other issues as in the hours ahead. Thank you. Okay.